We started Culturally Speaking to indulge our curiosity about the way others live and a desire to inspire conversations about how we have far more in common than we realise.
It's been a while.
I know, it's so nice to have you back.
I know it feels like I was away for quite some time, but then also I kind of slid right back into London. I think it's because I came back on the Sunday and I went into the office on the Monday.
Ooh, what's wrong?
I know I had some in-person things I couldn't decline, so being the good employee, I went in. Not very jet lagged though.
I was going to say, at least the jet lag is the right way round.
Yeah, I mean, I still went to bed Sunday night at like 9 and woke up at 5.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, but it's already shifted back. So, and speaking of which, I read this really interesting, it's on Twitter, there was the thread about why women are not best designed for the 9-to-5 life.
Okay, I'm all ears because I'm all about not doing what you should be doing.
And I'm saying this with a big caveat. I have not done my own research in this. I'm just kind of verbatim telling you what I read. So basically, a man's energy cycle is 24 hours, right? So the testosterone level, whatever, which is why you hear that, a lot of guys, I think, get a bit frisky in the morning because that's actually when their testosterone levels are replenished and they're full of energy, and that depletes throughout the day. So towards the end of the day, it's natural for them to then want to rest. Now, a woman's cycle, as you well know, and hopefully all the women listening know, we've got the moon cycle. We've got the luteal phase, blah, 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 throughout our whole cycle, and that's a month. Which is why you hear things like when you're on your period, you can lift heavier.
Yes, because the more isn't it about the blood flow and the
Well, and it's also the ratio, I think, of your progesterone and estrogen and all of those things. And obviously people on contraception probably has that a little bit mellowed out, but naturally our flow has a longer landscape than a man's.
So how does that translate to the 9-to-5 then? It means that we should be changing how we work through the month, like adjusting.
Yeah, so basically for a typical man, without any health conditions, it makes sense that you have a 9-to-5 day because that goes well with how you rest when you feel energetic. But for women, it might make more sense to, maybe focus on brain intensive things at a certain part of the month, etc., etc.
Well, you know what I say, a world designed by men, for men, about men, which is why I'm always really, really interested in women-centric design. But anyway, that aside, what are we talking about today?
So we are continuing our conversation about traditions, celebrations, holidays in the UK, but after the last episode, we are now going to cover the lesser known ones.
Yes.
So at the time of recording, we've just had Guy Fawkes. So let's start with that one. And you posted some stuff, I know.
I did. So Guy Fawkes just happened this past weekend, and I went to. So actually, we should explain what it is.
Yeah. So let me get into that.
Yeah.
So Guy Fawkes is on the 5th of November, and it's also known as Guy Fawkes Day, Bonfire Night, Fireworks Night. And it's an annual commemoration that we observe in Great Britain on the 5th of November, which involves bonfires and fireworks displays. And I actually think in the COVID years, we didn't have anything, right? And the history of this begins with the events back in 1605. And when I did research on this, it actually specified it's the old style dating system. Dating meaning calendar, not relationships. And apparently the old style and new style dating systems are about the before and after of the calendar change. So usually this refers to the change from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, which is what we use now. And it happened kind of between 1582 and 20th century. So in England, this is a massive sidebar, but I found this quite interesting. So in England, Wales, Ireland, and Britain's American colonies, there were 2 calendar changes, both happening in 1752. So the first adjust at the start of the new year from Lady Day, don't know why we got rid of that day, which is 25th of March, to the 1st of January.
Right.
While the second was the one that moved us from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, which effectively removed 11 days from September 1752. So imagine that month, you had half the month removed to fit with the Gregorian calendar. And from then on, people used the Gregorian calendar.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
so
Guy Fawkes happened in
the old style.
Yeah. Okay.
Because this was in the 1600s, right?
Yes.
So back to Guy Fawkes. So Mr. Fawkes, on 5th of November 1605, old style calendar, Guy Fawkes was a member of the I'll do this again. So Guy Fawkes, a member of the gunpowder plot, was arrested while guarding explosives that the plotters had placed beneath the House of Lords. So basically, the Catholic plotters had intended to assassinate the Protestant king, which is a whole other can of worms, which we will not get into today. So James I was a Protestant king, and the Catholic plotters wanted to assassinate him and his parliament. And basically, the attempt was foiled. Guy Fawkes got arrested while guarding the explosives, which, if you think about it, is rubbish. Like,
there's some like irony in that, isn't there?
Yeah. And so really, to celebrate that the king had survived, people lit bonfires around London. And again, the irony in that, they might have used the gunpowder explosives, for that.
I would, wouldn't you?
That would be poetic justice, wouldn't it?
I would. I think if you'd foiled an attempt on your life,
yeah,
you'd want to
and then
stick it back to them.
Make him watch.
Well, do you know what his real name was?
Tell me.
Guido.
Oh, that's really underwhelming. Okay.
Well.
So months later, the observance of the 5th November Act enforced an annual public day of Thanksgiving for the plot's failure. And I think this is one of the few things that celebrated a failure.
But actually a triumph for the monarchy, right? Because Protestantism survived. Because everyone thought that he was secretly a Catholic because his mother had been, and he was going to return Catholicism, and he obviously wasn't. But remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder treason and plot.
Exactly. So within a few decades, the Gunpowder Treason Day, as it was known, became the predominant English state commemoration. So because this day carried very strong Protestant religious overtones, it also became a focus for anti-Catholic sentiment back in the day. So Puritans would deliver sermons regarding the perceived dangers of popery, while during increasingly raucous celebrations, common folk would burn effigies of popular hate figures, such as the Pope. And it's interesting that it wasn't really that long ago, right, that people were so, I guess, outlandish with their displays of hate for certain religious figures.
As well, I think because religion ruled so much of day-to-day life.
True. It was much more pervasive, right, in day-to-day conversation, probably. So towards the end of the 18th century, reports appeared of children begging for money with effigies of Guy Fawkes. And 5th November gradually became known as Guy Fawkes Day. And again, the irony, and you named the day after the villain, which is quite funny. So towns such as Guildford were the 19th century scenes of increasingly violent class-based confrontations, fostering traditions those towns celebrate still, although now more peacefully. And in the 1850s, really, the anti-Catholic sentiment toned down a lot, and the observance of the 5th November Act was actually repealed in 1859. Ooh. Although obviously we still celebrate it today. Ooh. Anything for fireworks, I think.
Well, I was about to say, right, we've well and truly commercialized this one.
And eventually the violence was dealt with, and by the 20th century, this was a much more enjoyable social commemoration. Although kind of like Christmas, the original focus of it, I think, has just been lost in history. And actually settlers exported this to overseas colonies, including some in North America, where it was known as Pope Day. I mean, I can't even explain how far removed that has become.
So, we were saying about, I posted some stories on our Instagram because I went to a fireworks display at the weekend, which, let me tell you, was fabulous. It is one of the best ones in London. I'm slightly biased, but it is known as one of the best ones. And I posted some stories, and one of our followers told me that they celebrate it in New Zealand.
Oh, I saw that.
All of the English expats came over and brought the traditions with them, which I thought was like interesting, right? How these things migrate, because they're like, okay, why? But
and although a lot of these, I think, died out with the onset of the American Revolution.
Yeah.
So, which makes sense. So the second one I wanted to talk about was 12th night. We're getting slightly chronological, just because it's a bit rogue, and I personally don't think about it. I know that it happens, but I have no personal connections to it. So 12th night is also known as Epiphany Eve, and it's a Christian festival. That might be why I don't have a personal link to it. And this is on the last night of the 12 days of Christmas. So I think the only reason I know about this, or that it's in my mind, is I know that's when you take your decorations down.
It's also my dad's birthday.
Good reminder. I'll remember this. Not that I know your dad. So this marks the coming of the Epiphany. Different traditions mark the date of the 12th night as either 5th January or 6th January, depending on whether the counting begins on Christmas Day or 26th of December. And we're not going to go into the whole Boxing Day, is it a thing, because I think now, first of all, there are far fewer Christmas presents, because, between you and I, we do things together rather than gift things.
Yeah.
But also, I think I just open them as I get them. Depends. Like, if I have a tree, they will be under the tree. Depends on where I am. So.
But then what's the point of having a Christmas present if you don't wait to open it? Then it's just a present.
Oh, I mean, like, if they give it to me on Christmas Day, then I'll just open it.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it's Christmas Day.
Yeah. So anything before, I'd wait. But all I'm saying is I don't see the purpose in a Boxing Day. We've never observed that in our family.
But Boxing Day is still a sporting tradition.
Yeah, but I know a lot of families in Hong Kong anyway, they would only open their gifts on Boxing Day.
Oh, so we have the German thing of where we open them on Christmas Eve. Because that's the Germanic tradition, yeah.
I mean, a lot of British Christmas is very Germanic. Anyway, so Christians began marking 12th night in the 4th century. They believe that it marks the day the 3 wise men arrive in Bethlehem to visit the baby Jesus, as laid out in the nativity story. And I'll just throw it in there. Nativity play. We've talked about this before. I was one of the angels, I think mainly because of having long hair. So actually, I remember one year I was in Prague, and obviously they do it as Three Kings Day, and they actually have the chalk markings on people's doors. So I think that's really nice. Although I think in London, people wouldn't like that. If people would just...
I would chase somebody if they came and drew on my door with chalk.
Yeah, fair. So in 567 AD, which is so long ago, the Council of Tours proclaimed the 12 days from Christmas to Epiphany as a sacred and festive season, and established the duty of Advent fasting in preparation for the feast. The National Trust actually said about this, sadly in the 1870s, Queen Vicky, the first one, outlawed the celebration.
I love that you just called her Queen Vicky.
I hope that's not treason.
Okay, sorry, you and Vicky, obviously.
Well, it's like Queen Liz, right?
No, we can't do that.
Okay, Queen Victoria outlawed the celebration of the 12th night as a day of reveling, fearing everything would get out of hand. So that's probably when things dialed down a notch. So apparently there were a few popular traditions, which I did not know about. A popular one was to have a bean and a pea hidden inside a cake, a 12-night cake. And the man who finds the bean in his slice of cake becomes king for the night, while the lady who finds a pea in her slice of cake becomes queen for the night. So then parties would normally include, singing of Christmas carols, feasting. And there were also other items, apparently, that you could put in a cake for people to find. For example, a clove, which if you got the clove, you're the villain for the night. If you got a twig, which who would want a twig in a piece of cake? You would be the fool. And then a rag.
A rag?
A rag, yeah. It would mean you're the tarty girl. I know.
Also, what is the obsession with hiding things in cakes?
It came from, Victorian times, right? Where it was entertainment.
I know, but like today, like, do you know when you go to a restaurant and you see somebody with like an engagement ring hidden in a cake?
Oh, that's the worst thing. Someone's going to choke on it.
No.
Or break a tooth.
That's what I'd be worried about.
Yeah.
Like, imagine you go like in for like a big bite or a big forkful.
Well, the thing is, and a ring is not small. Okay, moving on. So I almost said the Theatre Royal, but no, the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane in London has had a tradition since 1795, actually, of providing a 12-night cake. And the will of Robert Baddeley actually made a bequest of £100 to provide cake and punch every year for the company in residence at the theatre on the 6th of January. So the tradition continues. I'll be interested to know if that's true. We should ask Flora, she's the only person I know who's closest to that world who could probably attest to this.
Theatre Royal on Drury Lane. If you're still having 12th night cake and drinks, let us know.
We'll come. Actually, we're not in the company.
We're not in the company, so we wouldn't be invited.
No. So English professor Nick Groom, I don't know who this is, but this was in the research that I did. I should have done more research. So apparently the tradition of taking down decorations on this day is a concept that has developed in modern times. It was basically the Victorians who decided that Christmas decorations should be taken down after 12 days because they wanted to get everybody to work. They're such bores. Like, what is wrong with them?
Because I thought it was like an old wives' tale, like it would be bad luck if your decorations...
That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's what we used to be told.
I mean, they were the ones who also started having children chimney sweep, so she's got a mean bone in them.
There was no Tay-Tay. We're not going to leave the Christmas lights up till January.
Oh, God. Oliver Twist was also Victorian times, right?
Yes.
They're just a miserable bunch.
They're very twisty, though. There's a lot going behind the surface. Like, they look very buttoned up, but I don't think they were.
True. And actually, the Tudors apparently kept celebrating the Christmas period until 1st of February, which is the eve of Candlemas, right? So, I'm glad we're not in Victorian times. That's all I'm saying. We'd be chimney sweeps, I'm telling you, because we're tiny.
Tiny. Yeah.
That's an awful thought. Okay, so the last one I wanted to talk about is Burns Night.
Of course.
Again, because it's not something I personally celebrate or partake in, but it's very, very famous and well celebrated here. So rewind a few steps. So bards are storytellers, for people who don't know the word or are not familiar with this. And this has become a word that's synonymous, right, with the world's greatest poets, just because of typically, I guess, who gets called a bard. The most celebrated one is Scotland's own national bard, Robert Burns, after whom this night is called. And people pay tribute to him every year on the 25th of January. Although, as I tell you more about the menu later, I'm not sure how much of it you would eat.
Well, I used to work in Edinburgh, so I actually have been in Scotland for Burns Night.
Okay, you can tell me later.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first supper was held in memoriam at Burns Cottage by his friends on the 21st of July, 1801, which is the 5th anniversary of his death. The first Burns Club, which still exists today, if you believe it, was founded in Greenock in 1801. And actually the first Burns supper, they thought his birthday was on the 29th of January, so that's when they celebrated it. And only the year after, they discovered through the parish records that they got his birthday wrong, so went back to 25th of January. And the Scottish Parliament considers the celebration of Burns Night each year to be a key cultural heritage event. And typically, whether it's a formal version of the dinner or an informal version, there will be haggis. There is a poem called Address to a Haggis. It is very long, so I think I'll just leave a link in the Instagram post and in the episode details so people can go have a look. Scotch whiskey, as expected, and the recital of Burns' poems. So this is the order of how things happen at a typical Burns supper. So first you have a bagpiper, which I expected.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about bagpipe music.
In what sense? It's very, gets everyone going, you know?
I think it's a very emotive sound, but I wouldn't listen to it on a casual Sunday night.
I don't think anyone listens to it on a casual Sunday night. I think it is very celebratory. It marks the occasion. I love a good wedding with a bagpipe.
Yeah, it gives it, I don't know, it's just a celebratory, like it gives it a real ceremony, like feels. Yes. So the host will say a few words, welcoming everyone to the supper, and there will be a grace, usually using the Selkirk grace. And here is someone reciting it because I cannot speak Scottish English.
Some hae meat and canna eat, and some would eat that want it. But we hae meat, and we can eat, and say the Lord be thanked. Amen.
So the Selkirk Grace is a well-known Thanksgiving said before meals that uses the Scots language. Although this was attributed to Burns, it was actually already known in the 17th century as the Galloway Grace or the Covenanters Grace. And I think it's called the Selkirk Grace because Burns was said to have delivered it at a dinner given by the Earl of Selkirk.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And to be honest, before researching it, I've never heard of it.
I mean, I've never also heard of the Earl of Selkirk.
Me neither. But it's like the whole thing about the Earl of Sandwich coming up with a sandwich, which turns out to be false.
I think I could have told you that. Shockingly.
So I After this, here comes the food. So first you've got soup, which it's soupy season now and I'm loving it. So you have a few options. You have the Scotch broth, which is usually barley, stewing or braising cuts of lamb, mutton or beef, root vegetables and dried pulses. I do like a good Scotch broth. Potato soup is an option. Cullen skink. I don't know how many people listening would have had it because it's not really something you would
We
get.
don't even
easily.
get it in England, to be honest, that often.
No.
Like, I used to remember when, like I said, I used to work in Edinburgh, and I remember going to this one particular cafe, like deli, and they had the best Cullen skink, but it was quite common to see it at a lot of places. But here I never ever see it on the menu.
And in case people haven't tried it, don't go buy the canned one, because that would not be a fair representation of it.
There's a canned version of Cullen skink.
Oh yeah, I think Baxter's or some brand has Cullen skink in a can.
I mean, it's smoked haddock, potatoes,
onions mainly.
Yeah.
I mean, you can kind of guess the flavor, but a proper one is very nice. Smoked haddock is just underrated. It's nice and kedgeree. It's nice in a lot of things. Anyway, so the fourth option is a cockaliki. So this is a leeks and peppered chicken stock thickened with rice or barley. So all very wholesome soups. Then when the haggis is brought in, a bagpiper leads the way. And again, you know, bagpipe music, whatever. And then, sorry, I don't want to be dismissive of bagpipe music, but I feel like this is a pretty constant occurrence in the whole supper. So everybody stands up as the haggis is brought in, usually by the chef on a large dish, and there will be certain songs. So a man's a man for that. Robbie Burns medley, or the stars of Robbie Burns might be played. And then the host or perhaps a guest will recite the address to a haggis, and it is long. I thought about reading some of them, but it is long. So I'll put a link in the episode description. And one of the lines says, "His knife see rustic labor dicht," like the word in German, presumably because of how old this tradition is. The speaker will draw and sharpen a knife. And then with another line that says, "and cut you up with ready slight." I'm saying that with a modern accent. He will plunge it into the haggis and cut it open from end to end. And apparently this is the highlight of the whole evening.
Watching the haggis be opened up.
Yeah. Kind of the disemboweling of the haggis is the thing of the evening. I mean, if the haggis was big, I can imagine it's quite an impressive sight to bear. Then at the end of the poem, a whiskey toast will be proposed to the haggis, not to the people. And then the company will sit down and eat. And usually this is served with neeps and tatties. And then there will be a dessert course. So cheese, some kind of dessert, coffee may also be part of the meal. And usually desserts will be quite traditional Scottish recipes. So it could be Cranachan. I hope I'm saying that right.
Is that like Kraken?
So a Cranachan is made with, like, traditionally it's made with raspberry harvest in June. So actually it's cream and fresh seasonal raspberries bolstered by oats and whiskey.
Oh, but in the winter?
Sounds quite nice. Yeah, sounds quite nice. So they do have alternative versions. So you could put, you could make a Cranachan trifle. You could add spiced rum. You could use shortbread. So I imagine you can make it quite wintry. That sounds really nice, actually. I think I like that. Or you could do a whiskey trifle, all washed down with the water of life, which of course is whiskey.
I was going to say, ode to whiskey and haggis is the theme, right, of Burns Night.
And it's funny how so many cultures call alcohol water of life. Think about aquavit. That literally is like water life.
I am going to stick with the Scottish theme and talk about some of the lesser known traditions that I was looking at this week. I'm going to start with Hogmany.
Okay, tell me.
So for anyone who doesn't know what Hogmany is, it's the Scottish word for the New Year. So it's celebrated on the 31st December. So while we have New Year's Eve, they have Hogmany. And the traditions of it actually go back to Viking times. So it's thought that the Hogmanay celebrations were brought to Scotland by the invading Vikings in the early 8th and 9th century. And they paid particular attention to the arrival of the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year. And they celebrated it with partying, obviously. And the Viking influence still remains strong in parts of Scotland. For example, the Shetland Islands, very north. The New Year is still called Yule's, which is from the Scandinavian word for midwinter festival of Yule. So Yule log, Yule's.
Oh, I love a Yule log.
But the thing that actually kind of might surprise you is, on a slightly sort of tangent note, did you know that Christmas wasn't celebrated as a festival and it was virtually banned in Scotland for around 400 years?
I did not.
From
For a religious reason?
Yeah, so from the 17th century to about the 1950s. That was not that long ago. Yeah. And so up until the 1950s, lots of Scots worked over Christmas and then celebrated the winter solstice holidays, the New Year. And they would exchange presents, known as Hogmanies.
Okay.
So, fun superstitions or traditions around New Year, which I think actually you might find relate to some of the things that happen in your culture, and they certainly happen in mine. So, things that you should do before midnight on the 31st of December.
Yeah.
Cleaning the house.
Okay.
Quite common for us, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I've just had New Year in my culture. You'll have Chinese New Year coming up. We always clean the house. Taking out ashes from the fire, which I guess is another, getting rid of
another cleaning.
Yeah. Clean slate. And to settle all your debts before the bells sound midnight.
Oh, I had that. Do you remember? In the Chinese New Year episode?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the underlying message is, clearing out the remains of the old year, having a clean break, and welcoming in the new year on a happy note.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, you talked about Burns, the great Scottish bard, and on New Year's Eve we sing Auld Lang Syne, which, so for anyone who doesn't know or doesn't know exactly what it is, so it's a tune that Burns published in 1788, but it's thought to have been in print 80 years before that. And it goes, should old acquaintance be forgotten and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and Auld Lang Syne? For Auld Lang Syne, my dear, for Auld Lang Syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for Auld Lang Syne.
What does Auld Lang Syne actually mean?
Oh. For old times, no?
That's what I mean, from context, I think that's what it would mean.
Yeah.
But so in Hong Kong, growing up, we knew the song, but it wasn't really sang regularly. Until I came here for boarding school, we sing that every end of term.
Oh, interesting. Okay. We sing Jerusalem.
Oh, that's a much more like kind of
rousing.
When I think Jerusalem, I think English football,
I quite like Jerusalem as a hymn.
It's a very like call to arms.
Yeah, rousing.
Yeah. Sidebar, sorry. I find that when you watch the Olympics or like something like the World Cup, when you hear different countries' anthems, I find that so interesting. Like, so I grew up obviously learning the Chinese national anthem from a very young age, and it's really reflective of when it was written. So it's a very militant song. If you look at the lyrics, if you listen to the music, and it's all about the people rising up, the people who don't want to be slaves rise up and fight. Right. And then look at God Save the Queen, or rather God Save the King now.
I wonder if
And-
ours is the only national anthem that changes.
Maybe. But then you also have ones which have no lyrics.
Yes.
And I find that incredible because what are you singing about? Like, there's no singing. There's no, like, literal meaning.
Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah. I mean, anyway. Sorry, that was a sidebar. Carry on.
So, back to Hogmany. So, some other things that are considered good superstitions. So, first footing, or the first foot in the house after midnight. To ensure that good luck for the house, the first foot should be a dark-haired male, and he should bring with him symbolic pieces of coal, shortbread, salt, black bun, and a wee dram of whiskey.
So we can't do it because we're not men.
No, but the reason it has to be a dark-haired male is that, throwing it back to Viking days, if a big blonde stranger arrived at your doorstep with an axe, it probably meant that you weren't going to have a great new year. So that wraps up Hogmany, I think. But moving further into the year, we're going to head into the summer. So, trooping the colour, so intrinsically British, definitely not celebrated anywhere else. So, trooping the colour marks the official birthday of the British sovereign, and it's been celebrated for over 260 years. And obviously this year, it'll be the first time that we're celebrating King Charles III's official birthday. The sovereign doesn't celebrate their birthday publicly on the day of their actual birth. They celebrate it in June for trooping the colour because the weather is much more favourable. And when I tell you about what trooping the colour is, it will make more sense. So during this, there are 1,400 parading soldiers, 200 horses, and 400 musicians coming together in what is essentially a huge display of military precision, horsemanship, and fanfare. Crowds line the streets with flags, and the parade moves from Buckingham Palace down the Mall to Horse Guards Parade, obviously. And members of the royal family will accompany the parade on horseback and in carriages. And there'll also be a fly past by the RAF. And that's when all the royal family stand on the balcony at Buckingham Palace to receive salute. So what actually happens during Horse Guards Parade is the sovereign, so it will be King Charles this year. The king will arrive at Horse Guards Parade and he'll be greeted by a royal salute. He'll inspect the troops. And for anyone who's ever visited London or has like the stereotypes, the images, these are the soldiers that you see wearing the red tunics and the bearskin hats. They stand guard at Buckingham Palace. So if you've seen Changing of the Guard, you'll have typically seen these soldiers in their ceremonial uniforms. The sovereign normally attends on horseback, but obviously the previous queen, when she got very old and couldn't ride anymore, she used to come in a carriage. There are over 100 words of commands used by the officer in command of the parade to direct all these hundreds of soldiers. And anyone who's ever watched a military display, particularly by the British armed forces, will know it's very well rehearsed. It's very precise. They pride themselves on just the attention to detail is second to none. So it is quite something to see. And then the king will go back to Buckingham Palace ahead of the soldiers. He'll take the salute again from the palace. And then there's a 41-gun salute. So, yeah, anybody can actually watch Trooping of the Colour if you are on the Mall, on the streets. Typically, they close down the roads, so members of the public can stand. But to be invited to the Horse Guards Parade to see it, you do have to be a guest, so to speak. You can't. Nobody can sort of just rock up there. But yeah, that's a very, I think, eccentric British tradition.
You know those gun salutes? Obviously, no one's ever gun saluted me, But sometimes I wonder if that first shot is still quite shocking.
Like, I remember I have been out and about in London, like on the street, you can like feel, like, even if you're not particularly close to it, it is still quite that kind of reverb. So yeah, I imagine it must be. So last one that I'm going to go over today, slightly different track, Notting Hill Carnival. So have you ever been to Notting Hill Carnival? No. So ironically, neither have I, despite having lived in London as long as I have. I'm never here for the August bank holiday. And for anyone who doesn't know, in the UK, we have what we call a late summer bank holiday. The last weekend in August, we have essentially a 3-day weekend. And this is when Notting Hill Carnival is celebrated. So it's an annual event, and it takes place on the streets of Notting Hill, as it suggests. And it's got its traditions in the African Caribbean community that moved to the UK as part of the Windrush generation in the post-1948 migration. But it's also got a lot of political background, and it's, over time, I think the nature of it has evolved and changed, but the kind of way that it came to be is really interesting. So Carnival in the Caribbean, particularly in the island of Trinidad, can be traced back to the period of slavery. And we've talked on previous episodes about Carnival being the start of essentially the period of Lent before Easter. So you have Mardi Gras in New Orleans, you have Carnival in Rio, but enslaved Africans weren't allowed to participate in those balls and festivals. So they developed their own festival, which drew on African dance traditions, and they satiricized their slave owners through masquerade and song. And after the emancipation of the slaves, free men and women took to the streets to continue these traditions. So sort of fast forward to the 1950s, you've got over 300,000 people from the Caribbean settled in Britain. Brixton and Notting Hill had the largest populations of Caribbean people in Britain. But on the other hand, Notting Hill also becomes a stronghold for Oswald Mosley's union movement, which is a far-right movement, and it galvanized the local white working class population to keep Britain white. So there becomes a period of racial tension, attacks on Black communities, and that culminates in the death of a carpenter, Kelso Cochrane. And this really turns the tide of Carnival and how it comes to be. So in response to the attacks and the tensions, an activist, Claudia Jones, founds the Caribbean Carnival in 1959. And it was a way of showing strength and solidarity within the Caribbean community. And off the back of that, there's a Trinidadian couple who hosted a similar indoor event. And then that evolves into what is now known as Notting Hill Carnival in the 60s. So today, if you go to Carnival, you'll see bands, you'll see lots of food stalls, you'll see dancing, music, and it's a very joyous atmosphere. But it has its roots in some very unsavory and very racially antagonizing historical moments with the Caribbean community. So today, I think it's come a long way, and it really goes to celebrate Caribbean culture, which is still a big part of, that part of London and populations, but it also encompasses far more than just the Caribbean population. You've got many people who go and visit to experience it. The carnival's come under threats lots of times, from being shut down, from not being funded. But, it continues to go. And I think this past summer was the first time, since COVID that Carnival returned. And I know a lot of people really mark it as something that they look forward to in the year. a highlight if you're in London that weekend. People will say, you're going to Carnival, where are you going, what are you doing? There's specific days and times for families and children. It really is a community event. So yeah, I think it's nice that we still celebrate the communities that came and make up the fabric of the United Kingdom, even if it's had to come out of something that was unpleasant. So we've covered some of the lesser known traditions and festivals in Britain, and I think it's nice that we have some little peculiar ones that no one else understands, but it is also interesting to see how they've traveled. Like, I did not know that Guy Fawkes had spread around the world, but if you're out there lighting up some fireworks, then good for you. We hope that you've enjoyed celebrating what I would say is the original terrorist, right?
Probably the first recorded terrorism act.
All right, well, we'll see you back another time. Thanks for listening.
Subscribe, rate and review on your favourite podcast platform, and follow us on Instagram at Culturally Speaking Podcast. You can also check out our website, culturallyspeaking.co.uk, for a transcript of this episode. Share your stories or your show ideas with us by sending us an email at theculturallyspeaking@gmail.com.